Welcome to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm Riane Eisler, President of the Center for Partnership Systems. This podcast brings you voices from the partnership movement, people using partnership practices to build a world that values caring, nature, and shared prosperity. The Power of Partnership podcast is hosted by Cherry Jacobs Pruitt, a health policy and partnership scholar. And now on to today's POP podcast episode.
Welcome, Kurt. On behalf of Riane Eisler and the entire Center for Partnership Systems team, I want to welcome you to the Power of Partnership podcast. I'm so excited to be talking with you today about interspirituality, evolution, consciousness, and global transformation. So, Kurt, you are an author, scientist, and interspiritual leader. You've co-founded numerous initiatives, including the Light on Light Press, the Hollow Movement, the Interspiritual Network, and Unity.Earth. You serve on numerous organizations such as the Evolutionary Leader Circle and the United Nations Committee on Spirituality, Values, and Global Concerns. So can we start with you sharing a bit more about your life's devotion to this work, including how you first learned about Riane Eisler's work and how it has impacted you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that, all of us who are polymaths, who have expertise across a lot of different fields, that didn't make a lot of sense 10 or 20 years ago. In this day and age, it makes a lot of sense. And so I've woven those two paths together for a long time. And I met Riane through connections at the United Nations when we were preparing a panel for the Global Oneness Summit. And we were on a panel together based on, her themes of partnership versus dominance. And when I got to know her then, I suddenly realized that I also had been corresponding with her husband, David Loye, for nearly 5 years. They didn't have the same last name, so I didn't know. And I'd been corresponding with him about all the new developments in evolutionary science that were taking our understanding of evolution away from dominance and toward partnership. So one of the first things we did was then invite her into the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, which if you go to evolutionaryleaders.net, you look at all those people there, you're going to say, oh my God, that's my bookshelf. And that's kind of the way it is. And we founded then this cornerstone synergy circle of about 20 evolutionary leaders, thought leaders who wanted to support her vision and her work based on her 4 cornerstones vision. So we can also talk about that as well, because it's all about, too, how we connect our inner dimensions and our outer dimensions. And of course, that's the connection between spirituality as the inner experience of how we live, and then science as our way of testing things and looking at things objectively. So in our day and age now today, we know those are finely interlaced, whereas, 10 or 20 years ago, it might not have been that way.
So let's go ahead and have you speak a little bit about those 4 cornerstones.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 4 cornerstones in Riane's work are the 4 basic things that really define whether a culture is moving more toward dominance or more toward partnership. And they're also the 4 things that people who are wanting to steer that way or the other way are using to get there. So the first cornerstone is the childhood experience, because if you grow up in a household where there's love and partnership, that's what you're going to bring into the world. If you grow up in a household that's full of dominance and bullying, you'll be wounded and become a wounder. You're bullied, you become a bully. So that formative time of our years, particularly in the neuroscience, as she points out, is so formative. So that's the first cornerstone. And she points out that Vladimir Putin, when he was solidifying his dictatorship in Russia, one of the first things he did was decrease the penalties for family violence, because he knew if you grew up in a violent home, you'd be ready for a violent culture. So the second one then is the attitude of a culture toward gender and all other forms of inclusion. because there again, that's going to be whether you're a partnership system of inclusion or a dominant system of who's in and who's out. Third cornerstone is economics, and that, of course, perpetuates and further defines whether there's a ranking system of who's in and who's out, and therefore it's a dominant system or a partnership system. And then the last one, which I'm sure everyone will relate to, is the story and language that a culture tells. Because we look all around the world where it would seem that people aren't acting in their own best interest, but the story of their religion or the story of their culture has told them that that's the way it should be. And so it's really those four cornerstones that she's defined. And as my own relationship with her has continued, I've come to see that I think the deepest mining into how we look at the world and whether we go toward very difficult times or we go toward transformation is really the bottom line of whether we're leaning toward a dominance consciousness and a dominance culture or toward a partnership consciousness and a partnership culture. So I think so many people in the world know that Riane, she's really nailed it. She's put her finger on that critical pulse of what's involved.
And so you met Riane and learned about her work through your work at the United Nations. Can you speak just a touch about what your journey was bringing you to the United Nations? I know you have a very, very rich life doing work with interspirituality, and I'd love for our audience to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, and absolutely. This year, actually, 2025, is the 25th anniversary of the naming of the interspiritual paradigm in a very famous book now by a person who was my mentor, Brother Wayne Teasdale, who was he was the official hermit and contemplative for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Chicago. And so I actually came east when I was in my first PhD program. I decided to do some inner work, and I went into a Christian contemplative monastic order, which I was actually there then for 10 years. And that was just up the Hudson River here. And that was just when East and West were starting to talk to each other in religion. And also when North and South were starting to talk to each other in religion, which would have been the relationship between the religions of indigenous peoples, spirituality of First Peoples, and then and first world spirituality. And so what happened then is that I already had a very deep scientific background. So the American Museum of Natural History discovered me, that I was in the area, and invited me to come and go as a resident research associate. So in my later days with the monastic order I was in, I was coming back and forth from the monastery up on the Hudson River and down to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. So long story short, interspirituality at that time became very controversial because you were standing for more than one brand than just one brand. And that caused difficulty for my religious order at that time. That wouldn't be true now. They're all very interfaith now. But being one of the early pioneers, a lot of people, I think, Willigus Yeager, Matthew Fox, you can name other people who were asked to leave the orders they were in because they were kind of ahead of their time on this interfaith discussion. So the reason I mentioned that is that once I was available, then I had a permanent position then at the American Museum of Natural History, and then was there for 25 years, and then also teaching at the New York Interfaith Seminary at the same time. So I was really living that double life. And of course, with the UN being located in New York City and all of their committees and all of their councils on all kinds of things with science and culture, then I got involved with UNESCO and with UNEP, which is United Nations Environmental Program, and then with the Committee for Spirituality, Values, and Global Concerns, which was all about the nexus of, our inner nature and how we approach global problems. So I got very intermeshed there. That's a reason that when I retired, which is kind of a joke, that I stayed in New York instead of going back to your roots, which would have been the beautiful state of Colorado, where I'd actually grown up.
Lovely. Thank you so much. How do you manage the challenge? You alluded to it just a touch with, when you were talking about the stories and narratives that, people inherently want to do what's right, but oftentimes they're being told from different sources a narrative about what is right. And that narrative can often be coming from their spiritual base, their place of worship.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing there is to look at the big picture and what's happening. What interfaith and interspirituality were about we're moving the religious and spiritual experience out of the head and into the heart. Because when people are doing religion and spirituality, they have the deep, deep part, which is always about love and reciprocity and kindness and compassion and all of those values. But then because religion tells a story about that, if we get aligned to the particular story, the Islamic story, the Christian story, the Buddha, then we start having again a competing system based on people's allegiance being to the ideas and not to the values. I mean, if you look at something as awful as the Inquisition, that's where you just see it so starkly. People were so connected to a theology that they were willing to brutalize people in the name of that and not even be conscious that it was completely in violation of the very values that their religion was teaching. So globally now, we've been going toward, whether it's in science or in religion and spirituality, toward more and more holistic, cosmopolitan, worldwide, world-centric, and even cosmocentric views, because we know that siloing culture to culture and, group to group is not going to work. Now, right now, of course, we're in a great period of regression. We're in a period now where we've regressed back to a big backlash back to the dominant systems. And we just have to hope that's part of the ups and downs of this evolution. But I would say 70s, 80s, and 90s, we were going through an incredible progression globally, worldwide. You saw the European Union coming together. You saw all of these understandings in the new physics and in evolutionary biology. And I'll just mention the last one because this was so important as well. Also to David and my relation to Riane is that in around 2015, and shepherded by some major books from Yale, Harvard, and Templeton Foundation, science really took a look at how selection is, how decisions are made in nature. And we've been living in this idea. We've been living in this world where people thought that survival of the fittest meant that the most fit person was the best competitor, meaning that a dominant system was how nature worked. Now, what happened then around 2015 and beyond, when we had supercomputers and we could run incredible amounts of data, we could ask, well, how do groups make decisions? It's obviously that individuals make selfish decisions, that's Darwinian selection, but how do groups make decisions? And what we found, and it blew the lid off of an entire paradigm shift, was when groups or levels of groups, what's called multi-level selection, when they make selections in nature, it's for the good of the whole. If you just think about it, an individual is going to make a decision based on what's good for them. But in a community or in a family, you end up making a decision that serves the whole. And what they discovered from that is that nature itself is trying to move in the direction even of a planetary altruism. Because understanding this kind of selection, finally, for the first time, explained to science, how does goodness evolve? Because the paradox was that if everything's about Darwinian selection, which is competition, how the heck does goodness ever evolve? But now that we knew that groups make decisions based on the good of the whole, then you can understand, okay, I see how we could get there. So a lot of those scientists who were the founding people, we did a lot of conferences back then, State University of New York, the Adler Library in New York City, also a big one in Boulder, on that paradigm shift. And of course, that's right in step then with what Riane is voicing, because where we're trying to get, and it's so odd because it's in sync with our hearts. Like if you do a poll worldwide, 99.999% people say what they want is a safe space in which to explore life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everyone wants that. So why are we in a world that's the other way around? So science then, both in the physics, with the Nobel Prizes for entanglement and interconnection, and then in evolutionary biology, understanding how groups make decisions, we were actually moving in this direction that Riane talks about, which is toward the partnership consciousness and the partnership culture. So that's how I kind of navigate it myself, because I understand we're in that progression at a global level, and some of us are more ahead of others relative to where we're at on that. I'll make one more comment. The reason that is it has to do with where people find safety. The people who are going toward a partnership consciousness, where they find safety is in a unity and a partnership of groups. People who are in the more regressive side, bless their hearts, they're actually finding safety in circling the wagons only around their point of view and having a silo. So it's very innocent in a way, because it's all about where people find safety. But the result is that we're in this swinging back and forth toward partnership or toward dominance, and that's where Riane has just got her finger right on the pulse.
Beautiful. You are listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We hope you are enjoying today's episode and you will consider joining our family of sponsors. Or you can help us attract sponsors by downloading, following, or subscribing to the series and liking and rating each episode you view on YouTube. We also would love to hear from you, including if you have a partnership story that you would like to share. Reach out to us at center@partnershipway.org. And now, back to today's episode. So can you talk about the projects that you're working on right now?
Yeah, so when Riane became part of the evolutionary leaders and we founded the Cornerstone Synergy Circle, there are about 20 evolutionary leaders that stepped up to support that work. And right now we're working on 3 initiatives with her, which are things that she's wanted to see happen. And one is, they're all under this banner of connecting the dots. And there's a new website you can go to, Riane Eisler, connectingthedots.com. And it's all about everything we just talked about. If you connect the dots between this whole conversation that we just had, you end up arriving at her view of the spectrum between dominance and partnership. So one is about that. But then another that's really important goes to the first cornerstone, the experience in childhood. And that is we're planning a summit about this in the fall with a lot of major people. And that is the question of understanding how violence scales, and that your experience in childhood and your experience in the family is probably going to determine the other ways that your experiences of violence will scale in the world. I think you know that when they interview terrorists and when they interview, people who are in prison, they usually find out that those people were severely abused when they were in those early years, and so they then become abusers. So that project on Peace Begins at Home is about understanding how violence scales, and that's a part of connecting the dots. And then the last one is called Arts for a Partnership Culture. And that's because if you take a look at the evolutionary leaders, there are a tremendous amount of well-known artists and entertainers and well-known musicians and culture people that are in that group. And they know that the arts and culture are maybe the most powerful way that you bring this message to people, and not just through the intellectual framework, which people can just tune out. But if they're experiencing that deeply in an emotional experience, then they can be brought to that understanding. So those are the 3, and they're all under Connecting the Dots, Peace Begins at Home, and Art for a Partnership Culture. And what we're hoping for, we have a plan in the works and coming together for a major film competition, inviting filmmakers to concentrate on themes with regard to these visions, and have some significant prizes for that so that people could move that direction. We already have been part of setting one up for micro shorts. I think you know what micro shorts are. They're films that are no more than 90 seconds, very high end, sometimes without any words, but music and animation, or that are all about those values of love, kindness, caring, reciprocity, mutuality. And they're very short, so very effective on social media. And if you want to see that, actually, if you take a look online at illuminatefilmfestival.com, then you'll see their micro shorts competition, where they have these prizes now for people creating these really moving micro shorts about how we could move toward partnership.
And so what are your thoughts about how people can kind of stay immersed in that more positive partnership-based messaging and connection to the heart?
Yeah. I think the best thing there is to quote the Dalai Lama, and he always says, take the path that's nearest your home. Mm-hmm. And I think all of you know groups, networks, circles, organizations very near you who are working in some thematic area or passion area that also hits you in the heart and would invite you to be a part of that. And if you can find a group like that, and then you have the experience of being fulfilled by that partnership work toward a passion area for governance, for justice, for women, for girls, whatever it might be, then you're doing something that's extremely fulfilling, and it's also a part of this larger groundswell. What we're trying to do now is we're realizing that a lot of the success of this regressive swing has been through the way that they've used media to perpetuate their views of dominance. And we are going to have a profile from the transformative community that's as high level and as active as the one that's driving these hurtful and negative messages. It's sad to think that people would go that direction, but again, if that's where they see safety, us against them, then you can kind of understand it. But the problem is that that's doomed to dead end. If you look at any story, for instance, you look at the Nazis, which was an incredible false story. It lasted 20 years. People were yelling and cheering and carrying on and everything else. 20 years later and 90 million deaths later, people realized it was an untrue story. It was not a story that was really about who we are. It was really a story about us and them. So those things are doomed to dead end. But the question always is how long and at what price? So it's a very critical time.
Yeah, thank you. So I know, Kurt, that you're also involved in a podcast. Can you speak a little bit about that with our audience?
Yeah, I'll tell you about the one that we've been running on Voice America for 10 years, actually. And now Voice America is in a transfer to a new platform. So the programs are on in a shift. But the evolutionary leaders actually published a book in 2020 called Our Moment of Choice, which won a Gold Nautilus Award, a Living Now Award, a COVR Award. And it was really 40 different thought leaders, again, people on your bookshelf, talking about how we would meet the needs of this time across numerous thematic areas: governance, justice, ecology, go through the list. And based on the success of that book, which is Simon and Schuster book, those of us who were editors founded the Light on Light Press. And we founded the Light on Light Press particularly for paradigm shifting books. And we've actually been involved now 3 years. We've won 8 Nautilus Awards. And in 2024, we won Best in Small Press from Nautilus. And it's all because all of the books are about the paradigm shift. So that includes books by Irvin Laszlo, The Great Upshift, The Survival Imperative, books by Bob Atkinson, who's the author of The Story of Our Time. That book is a new story of wholeness. Another great book from Dr. Paul Mills, who's the director of research for Deepak Chopra's foundation, was The Spiritual Lives of Scientists. Science, Being, and Becoming was all about that straddle. And then we have the volumes that we'll be doing this year on interspirituality, the heritage, and interspirituality, the future. And then also a major book on group consciousness with some of the greatest group consciousness thinkers and activists in the world, because that's where we got to go. If we're going to go toward partnership, we're going to have to understand group consciousness. And again, to answer one of your earlier questions, when all of you might want to get involved with a group, if it's a skillful group, and you find a group that's very skillful about it, that's where you're going to find a lot of fulfillment, where you're doing stuff together in that magic of a group consciousness. You see it on the football field when a team's playing well, they're in the zone. On a basketball team where they're swishing the net because they're in the zone together, it is a consciousness. And people, you're a musician, you know that when you're having a great jam, it's because people are in that group consciousness. So we're doing a book on that as well.
And so the podcast, are you interviewing authors about their upcoming books or the book?
Yeah, we review thought leaders all around the world across every dimension. I mean, economics, medicine, spirituality, governance, justice. If I went through the list of, Nobel Prize winners, we've been really, really lucky. And one of the reasons that we have to think through this migration now is, all of you know that everything now in media is going to multi-availability, where what you do is available on Spotify, it's available on Apple. And so we're moving to a platform like that. We just have to kind of see where it goes. But that's what our moment of choice does. We talk to people who are at the forefront of what's going on in this or that area, economic justice, governance, and then ask them, to, just like I'm talking to you now, to tell us what you're doing, why it's important, and how it's becoming effective.
And so you're bringing up another really interesting point about the times that we're in, is the role that technology plays. Can you share just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's a little bit disturbing in a way, because there was 100 sociologists that gathered as a part of Evolution Institute This is this group that's following on this new understanding of natural selection. This is about a year ago, and they declared that the problem now with misinformation and disinformation and conspiracy theories driven by algorithms is at the level of an evolutionary catastrophe. And the definition of an evolutionary catastrophe is that something so upsets the norm, like when the comet came in and wiped out the dinosaur, it so upsets the norm that you have no idea how you would get back to a new normal. That's what an evolutionary catastrophe is. And I think if all of us look around the world, this problem now with misinformation, disinformation, and not knowing what's true and not having any way to know what the facts are, it works for the people who are trying to gain power and influence by it. But for the species and the planet, it is a potential catastrophe. And so when we talk about this, then, that's the thing that bothers me most. But of course, now what we're all having to do, because now everything is open source, everything is available to everybody. We just have to study how the voice for the values that we're talking about can get out there in the most effective way. And here you are with your podcast doing that very thing. So, that's the way I'm thinking of it now. I'm a part of a media collaboratory across networks that's talking about how we do this together so that we can get more good news out there instead of all the bad news and stuff that inspires people as a part of what depresses people or wounds people. Because, if you think about it, that's a huge dead end. I mean, if we keep going that direction at a global level, we're going to have very, very bad times ahead.
Yeah. Well, I want to, for our listeners, make sure in the show notes, I'll be including links to all of the resources and references that Dr. Johnson has been sharing throughout our discussion. I'm also going to be including a link to David Loye's book, Darwin's Lost Theory, as a very foundational book to discredit that false narrative that we've really been told about survival of the fittest that Dr. Johnson referenced. So, Kurt, this has really been a wonderful conversation. I really, really have enjoyed it. I do wonder, though, before we end, if you have some final words that you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, one thing I will share, it spins off your last comment, and it's where people can get confused. Survival of the fittest is true, but what happens is that the definition of fitness changes as a system complexifies. And as a system complexifies, the definition of fitness becomes cooperation and not competition. So that's the big shift. And with a conscious species and in a complex culture, then that fitness is all about cooperation. And that's really, again, the bottom line. If you look at Riane Eisler's message about moving toward the partnership consciousness and partnership cultures and away from the dominance consciousness and dominance cultures, that's actually what it's about. And if we go that direction, we have a future. We have a very bright future. If we go the other direction, we have a very, very difficult future. It's really that simple. And the question is going to be, can our species figure that out and make the course corrections that are necessary that at a global level we could move that direction? This planet could be a paradise if everyone was in partnership. That's what's bizarre. This planet could be a paradise if everyone was working together. And that's the consciousness that has to arise, hopefully will arise. And thank you, Terry, and everything that you're doing, with Riane and this podcast in that direction.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to the Power of Partnership podcast. We're grateful to Rising Appalachia for the use of resilience as our Power of Partnership theme music. If you would like us to feature your partnership story, or if you would like to be a proud sponsor of the Power of Partnership podcast, please contact us at center@partnershipway.org. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will leave us a review on your favorite podcast channel. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released. I'm Cherry Jacobs Pruitt. See you next time on the Power of Partnership podcast.
I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to listen.